Good afternoon. Thank you for taking part in Vermont Holocaust Education Week and joining us on this United Nations designated Holocaust Remembrance Day. I'm Heidi Fishman, a board member of Vermont Holocaust Memorial. We are a virtual, volunteer-run nonprofit whose mission is Holocaust education throughout Vermont. Please visit our website, holocaustmemorial-vt.org, for information on our upcoming professional development workshop, contest, projects, speakers, resources, and exhibits. Our speaker for this session is Hank Greenspan. Dr. Greenspan is an emeritus psychologist, oral historian, and playwright at the University of Michigan. He has been interviewing, teaching about, and writing about Holocaust survivors for over 50 years. Rather than retelling a one-time testimony, Hank's approach has been to meet with the same survivors many times, sometimes over years. 3 books, multiple essays, and an award-winning play, Remnants, are based on his work. Remnants has been performed at over 300 venues worldwide, including Burlington, Vermont, about 10 years ago. Please feel free to type questions in the Q&A section during the program, and we will try to get to as many as we can in the time allotted after the formal presentation. Hank, thank you for making the time to share your performance with the audience today, and I will turn the program over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Heidi. And thanks for all who are out there. Of course, it's webinar, so I don't know who that is, and I can't see you, but I wish I could, because I'm a teacher and one always wants to see students and folks. I'm going to be very brief because I want to get to your questions. It's my favorite part of doing any of this work, which is the conversation that follows. But I'll just say this. Heidi's already introduced the core of it. When I began in 1970 to interview, talk with survivors, there was hardly any of that work. There was some, but many survivors said to me in those days that I was the first, quote, American, meaning born in the US after the war, not by much, but some, with whom they'd spoken about their experiences during the war. And that blew me away, to be honest. You know, here we are 25 years after liberation, 1945, and I'm the first one. What did that mean? Where did that go? And we continued, and because there wasn't so much of that work done then as there became, there was no model exactly of how to interview a survivor. So we winged it. And the approach that we developed, which is as much from survivors' perspectives as mine, was what Heidi mentioned, was meeting more than once. It wasn't a single video testimony that we've become used to. It was meeting many times, and it varied for each person. Not everyone wants to hang out with me, talk forever, and some of you do, right? And that's true in life, yes. Many people who became friends, and that's really what many of these survivors became. People I knew for, in some cases, decades, 30, 40 years. So we know these are friends. One of the things that happens when you know somebody well is every now and then they will tell you something, and maybe they've told you the experience before. But at these times, it's as though they somehow hit on an image or just a tone of voice or a rhythm of speech that just nails it. You know, this is not everyday conversation. When those moments happen, they're gifts, a kind of natural poetry. And you know it. I mean, people feel it both when they say it and when you hear it, like, wow, that's an amazing image. That's an amazing way of capturing something. What this piece is, Remnants, is a trajectory in which I try to reconstruct those kinds of very special moments. Yeah, it's not typical, quote, testimony. As you'll hear, it's as much about us as listeners, or in some cases, not listeners, as it is about survivors' experiences to themselves. But it comes and emerges from those special times. Also makes it condensed. So I hope, well, I won't say anything more. I'll let you experience it however you do, and then we'll have a chance to schmooze, my favorite word. Schmooze is New York for talk. The voices of Holocaust survivors are themselves survivors. Each must draw on words and cadences that once belonged to entire communities, even while retelling how those communities were destroyed. And each must persist within a remembered terror that can still consume a voice, and sometimes does. Remnants is a gathering of such voices. Voice, a woman. During the war, I lost my voice. I literally lost my voice. I was a little kid at that time, little pisher, like we say in Yiddish. I was 8 years old, and at that time I lost my voice. This was in 1943, in the ghetto. It was after one of those actions, you know, when the SS come in and they kill a lot of people, and they round up the others and they take them to the train. The train takes them away. After one of those actions, I lost my voice. I don't know why, but for 2 years, I did not speak a single word. After the war, my voice came back. Not right away, but very slowly. This was in 1945 in a DP camp, a camp for displaced persons, mostly for Jews who had survived the war. During the day in that camp, I did not speak at all. But at night, when I was having a nightmare, I screamed. So that was how we knew I still had a voice, because during the day I was completely mute. During the night I screamed. There was a doctor at that camp, a Jewish doctor, who said, if the girl can scream in the night when she's asleep, so she can scream in the day when she's awake. And if she can scream in the day, so she can also sing or cry. And if she can sing or cry, she can speak words as well. The voice can be salvaged. The screams can be refined into cries, and the cries can be refined into words. So the doctor tried to help me. He took me to run in the hills near that camp, and he had me run with my mouth open so I could feel the air push up against my throat. And he told me to try to scream with the air in my throat, or make any sound at all. And soon I did start to scream when I was running, and then I was crying and making other different sounds. And eventually, the sounds became a voice. I could speak words again after 2 years of no words at all. Today, we have many words about the Holocaust. We argue, what does it mean? What should we do? What should we have done at the time? We argue for God and against it, for Israel and against Israel, for reaching out to others and against reaching out to others. We argue and we reflect, and we argue some more. But to me, when I think about the Holocaust, I remember the doctor. And I remember myself when I was a young girl running in the hills. Because to me, all our words, whatever we say about the Holocaust, are just so many different refinements of a cry. And the cry is just barely salvaged from a scream. And the scream is just barely salvaged from the silence. Mars, a man. In the beginning, right after the war, we wanted to talk about it. I mean, if we could talk about it, we wanted to talk about it. We needed to talk about it. I wanted to talk about it a lot, but nobody wanted to hear. Like when I first came into this country, nobody wanted to hear about nobody wanted to hear about it. My own cousin, dentist in California, I met when I first came over here. He said to me almost the first thing, he said, Manny, I know what you went through. I saw the newsreels. I don't want to hear a word about it. That's what he said to me. I saw the newsreels. But you know, funny thing. To me, a funny thing I noticed made me think, maybe they did say something. This was 1947, 2 years after the war. Now, I noticed there were reports coming out, the first ones, about unidentified flying objects. This was the beginning of all that, but the Martians are flying. So 1947. Suddenly, 1947, all these unidentified flying objects were showing up. And just like they say today, some people were saying they saw the people from inside the spaceship. Just like they said that, they said they saw the people who were coming from Mars. And the people they saw had big bald heads. And they had skinny arms and skinny legs and large eyes. Always the large eyes and those big heads and those skinny little bodies. Now I said to myself, I've seen these people before. I've seen these people before. I've seen those thin, tiny, skinny bodies. I've seen those bald heads bobbing up and down. I've seen those large eyes that were everywhere, staring. Eyes seeing everything, seeing nothing. I've seen these people before. And my cousin, the dentist in California, he had also seen these people before. He saw them in the newsreels. I saw them on Mars. Buried in the cemetery, a man. How do you destroy an entire people? Think about it. It's not an easy thing to do. It is not only killing millions of individuals, though it is certainly that. And it is not only degrading their culture, their way of life, though it is certainly also that. But to destroy a people, you also have to wipe out every trace. The slightest possible trace of their existence. You have to destroy all the evidence. Not only that they ever lived, but also that they ever died. Late in the war, one of the camps I was in, our job was to dig up the corpses of those whom the Germans had killed earlier. This happened in many of the places where they didn't have crematoria. There were mass graves, huge burial trenches all over Poland and Russia and the Baltics. The people had been shot or gassed or just buried alive. They didn't want to waste bullets. Little children especially were often buried alive. So our job was to dig up the corpses, and the German and Ukrainian guards screamed and beat us while we piled the bodies onto huge pyres. And then they poured gasoline on the bodies and set them on fire. In this camp, even burning the bodies was not the end. They also took the gravestones from the Jewish cemeteries in that area, and many of the stones they had us break up, turn them into gravel to use to pave the muddy roads. And some were brought in to be stone platforms, like workbenches, when we were burning the bodies. After the bodies were burned, we had to collect all the ashes and put them on the workbenches, on the gravestones. And if there were any large pieces of bone, or even little pieces, SS made us grind them up. We had other pieces of stone from the gravestones. So we were able to grind all the pieces of bone into a fine gray powder. Chief SS officer had a sieve that he carried, and all the prisoners had to bring him the ashes they had ground up. All the remains of the people had to be able to pass through the sieve. At the end, gravestones that we were using as workbenches were also ground up, and the gravel and the ashes were mixed together with sand, spread around in the soil, and more soil was added over that, and grass seed was laid down. After a few weeks, grass started coming up. It looked just like any other meadow. There was no sign that anything unusual had ever happened there. And that's how the Germans murdered the murder of my people, and how we buried the cemetery. Missing persons, a woman. Some of the stories we tell, some of the things that happened, even I myself find hard to believe. Like, I have a very good friend. She was in Berlin, just outside Berlin during the war. She was never sent to Auschwitz or any of the other camps. She was just living there on false papers with a false name, false identification. So nobody in Berlin knew her. And they didn't know she was Jewish. To them, she was just a German girl working in a clothing factory, making uniforms outside Berlin. In Czechoslovakia, she had friends, non-Jewish friends who were helping her parents. So she was able to find out what was going on. And she heard from these friends that her parents and her little brother and her sister had been taken to Theresienstadt. Now, Theresienstadt was a camp, but it was not considered as bad. This was because the Germans kept it as a kind of showplace, a camp where they cared for their prisoners. But then, at the end of 1943, they took my friend's family to Auschwitz. She found out because even in Auschwitz, the Czech Jews from Theresienstadt were kept for a while in a special camp, and they were made to write postcards about how well they were being treated there. The friends of her family received one of these postcards. They did not believe what was written. They knew it was a trick, and so did my friend. And in fact, there was no more word from her parents or her little brother or her sister. They'd all been taken to the gas. My friend did not know exactly what happened, but she knew that her family was gone. This was already 1944, and almost all the Jews were gone. They were gone from Germany. They were gone from Czechoslovakia. Millions of Jews were gone from Poland. So my friend, she did a crazy thing. She herself does not know why she did it. Maybe it was despair. Maybe she no longer wanted to live. Maybe she really was crazy. She didn't know what she was doing. But she called the Gestapo headquarters. She just called them up on the telephone. The very people who were taking the Jews away. And when the Gestapo officer answered the phone and asked her what she wanted, she said she would like to report a missing person. And who is missing? The Gestapo officer asked. My friend said that her mother was missing. She had been in Theresienstadt and then she had been put on a train. Now she was missing. And my friend said that her father was also missing. A sister and a little brother. She gave the Gestapo officer their names, just as though it was normal circumstances. And then she described them for him so he would know them if he found them. My mother has long, flowing, beautiful red hair, freckles. My father is a strong, handsome man. He's tall. He used to play a lot of soccer. My little brother is 8 years old. He has red hair and freckles like my mother. And my little sister is 6. She is dark and strong like my father. And the Gestapo officer took all the information. Apparently, he was very polite. He promised to call her back if he heard anything about the whereabouts of her family. And how can I get in touch with you? He asked. And my friend told him where she lived. She told him the truth. And she told him where she worked and what she looked like. She told him more than they would ever need if they wanted to find her. But they never did find her. Never called, never came. She never heard anything from them. Maybe they assumed she was crazy. Maybe they assumed she was already dead. Dolls, a woman. All they did on Kristallnacht was decapitate my dolls. I had a wonderful collection. I was a little girl who loved all her dolls. We were lucky. Somebody warned us they were coming. When we returned to the apartment, the dolls were sitting together, leaning against each other on our dining table. and their heads were all cut off. My husband and I went back to my hometown in November '88, and we had a wonderful time. Truly, truly, it was totally gemütlich. The people couldn't have been nicer. They were glad to see us. This was for the 50th anniversary of the Kristallnacht. They invited all the Jews from my hometown who had survived. And they had an exhibit called All the Jewish People Around the World, with a big chart that looks just like my son's in our basement. His is called Sea Mammals of the World. All the seals and whales and porpoises and the places where they live. And my hometown had all the Jewish people around the world. And dolls, too. They were selling dolls, too. Jewish people around the world dolls. Just like the American Indian dolls we have in this country, in America, all dressed up in native clothes. And a lovely little girl came running up to me, German girl from my hometown, and she had one of these dolls, a little blonde German Jewish doll. And she put it in my hands. And she said, "This is Elsie, and she's Jewish, and I love her." She put it right in my hands to show me Elsie, how much she loved her. And my husband turned completely pale. I swear to God, he was absolutely white. He knows me well. He reads my mind. I'd do anything. I just gave it back. I did nothing at all. I just gave it back. I didn't tear its head off. How to survive a man. Whenever I speak, somebody always asks me, "How did you survive?" That's what they always want to know. How did I survive? What gave me the strength to go on? What gave me the hope to get through? I don't know why they always ask this. Maybe because today everybody wants to be some kind of survivor. Like, I go to the bookstore and I look at the books, and they have How to Survive the Loss of a Love and the Survival Manual for Young Parents. Then they have Surviving the Breakup if you're going to get a divorce, Step Family Survival Guide if you're going to get together. Doesn't matter if you're losing people or you're gaining them. It's survival either way. And everybody wants to be some kind of survivor. So I was curious. I decided to read one of these survival books. This was Norman Cousins, a Jewish guy. And he wrote The Anatomy of an Illness. Have you read it? It's about how he survived an illness. See, Norman Cousins, he got some kind of bad arthritis. In the meantime, he had a lousy doctor. So he gets another opinion. He finds a doctor who lets him do whatever he wants. So what does he want to do? He takes a lot of vitamin C, he watches a lot of funny movies, and he laughs. And eventually, his arthritis goes away. He says that laughter and jokes give a big boost to the immune system. Now, apparently, the immune system has a sense of humor. Anyway, Norman Cousins, he says if you want to survive, you should look at the bright side, watch the comedians, and find a doctor who's not a sourpuss. That's how Norman Cousins survived. I'll tell you though. For me, it was different. What helped me survive? They don't write it in a book. It's not any of the books that I looked at. And I don't think they're going to put it in Reader's Digest either. Because I don't think people really want to read this. Because see, what helped me survive was not jokes and funny movies and looking at the bright side. No, not at all. What helped me survive was hatred. Pure, undiluted hatred. And the wish for revenge. So when I was in the camp, and I looked at the SS man with the machine gun in the tower, I said to myself, one day I'm going to be up in that tower. One day I'm going to have that machine gun. See, this is the power of hatred. The power to stay alive. To stay alive because I looked at that SS son of a bitch. And I said to myself, I'm going to survive you. I'm going to survive you. You will be torn to pieces. I will go on. And thank God I did. Thank God I did. To myself. Thank God I did. The vanity, a woman, and very close friend. Whenever I'm introduced as a survivor, I'm a little bit uncomfortable. I mean, what do people want? What do they expect? In the beginning, until just the last few years, nobody wanted to hear from us. Everybody said, this is to forget. Life goes on. Hush up your bad dreams. Like, this may sound silly, but we heard in this country, when you laugh, the whole world laughs with you. And when you cry alone. So that's exactly what we did. We said, we're Americans too, and we are. And we kept our memories to ourselves. Now, today, everybody makes a big deal out of it. I mean, they don't just invite us to speak, but they turn us into some kind of heroes. They talk about the special wisdom we're supposed to have and the precious legacy we're supposed to pass on. And all the tales and legends we're supposed to be able to retell. What is this? A bar mitzvah? A celebration of our Jewish roots? I mean, we, whose roots were totally destroyed, are supposed to have a precious legacy. And we, who can hardly speak at all, are supposed to tell you fabulous tales and legends. In the beginning, people were silent. Today, they are stupid. But I'll tell you, I'm stupid too. I don't have wisdom. I don't even know what I think. I mean, I lived through it. I remember it. But even I don't know what the Holocaust means or what we should believe about it. One memory I'll tell you, because then maybe you'll understand this stupidity of mine. You know,
I was part of the time in Birkenau. That was the part of Auschwitz where they had the gas chamber in the shower room and the crematorium. Birkenau was where they killed most of the people in Auschwitz. And I was in a group of prisoners who sorted the clothes of those who had already been gassed and burnt. After they went into the shower room, gas chamber, we came out and packed up the clothes they left behind. And also in Birkenau, there was the prisoners' latrine, you know, where we went to the toilet, which was really just a bench with a row of holes over a pit filled with quicklime. So this was where we went to the bathroom. And in the latrine of Birkenau, the SS took one lady, one of the prisoners, and they made her the Scheißkapo. This was a joke for the SS. It means the shit commander. That was her title. It was on a sign she wore around her neck. And her job was to watch the toilet and be like a kind of attendant. She had to keep it neat and clean. One day I noticed this lady, Scheißkapo, had managed to find a few boxes. Somehow she got a couple of old crates made of wood, and she put them together with the little one in front so she could sit on it. And she also had a little mirror that she probably found in the clothes from one of the prisoners who'd been killed. So with the boxes and the mirror, she made like a little bureau. She put the mirror over the big box and she sat on the little box and made like a little vanity in the corner of the latrine. A little vanity in the corner of the ladies' room. Whenever people ask me, what does the Holocaust mean? Or I ask myself, what does it mean? I think about this memory. It's not easy to do. Try to keep the picture, all the elements of the picture, together in your mind at one time. A vanity in the latrine in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Now you tell me because I don't know myself. Does it inspire your hope or your revulsion that the attendant in the toilets of hell made a place to put on her makeup? Thank you.
So we are back. Yeah, I just want to, while you're thinking about whatever you may want to say by way of question or reflection or anything else, take your time. But we have 20 minutes. Don't take too much. But I want to say that whatever is on your mind, I really welcome. I really, really welcome. So don't be shy. Let it come. And hopefully, we'll learn from each other, which is what a good conversation is. Yeah, it's not only people expressing views, but it's learning with each other.
That was incredibly powerful, Hank.
Thank you.
Amazing. I nodded my head a lot and tears were in my eyes. And some of that was just, this is a young audience we're showing this to. So you're a psychologist, I'm a psychologist. The first thing I want to say, if people go home after school today and they have some heavy, difficult feelings, talk to your parents, take time to understand them. If you need to cry, if you need to, talk about it. You need to talk about it because this is heavy stuff.
This is-
Um,
if I'll just by way of that, I was very fortunate that I had a close friend and colleague, historian, and he was teaching just down the road, and we met all the time to talk with each other. We interviewed and knew many of the same survivors. If it weren't for him, I don't think I could have done this work. He was my brother. I mean, in every real sense except the literal one. So that was essential.
I have a whole list of questions for you. I'm just going to jump in and
Whatever.
let students get their heads wrapped around this to figure out where to ask the questions. But I guess the first thing I want to ask you is, you did so many interviews, you talked to so many survivors for so long, and then you said there's that moment where they nailed it, where the core of something they experienced. Do you think that you could have noticed that and grabbed it if you weren't both a psychologist and a writer and an actor? I mean, it seems like you're coming at this from different angles. And if someone doesn't have all of those angles, how would they notice it and get it?
Of course, I don't know because I'm not that other person really, but I suspect yes, to a certain extent, partly because, and here I think about my work as a psychologist, but none of this was therapy. And yet I think we know in conversation with folks that when things like that happen, they themselves realize, my goodness, what I just said. And they'll pause. Sometimes they themselves will tear. Not because it's sad necessarily, but because, as if like the truth makes you free, there's that sense of, wow. And so I think when you see that, and then you feel it on your side of the conversation, I do think that there's a certain recognition, a weird analogy, but it's almost like when you're watching musicians, jazz musicians, and they're quote in the zone, they're really just somewhere that's the core of something. I think we recognize that as an audience, even if we don't in a way realize it, but we respond to it. So, who knows, I guess I'd say, but I think so. And, I should also say, I spent many years reading and learning the history and reading memoirs before I did any interviews with any survivors, and certainly well before I wrote this piece. So to some extent, that also was essential in terms of my recognizing this really gets to the core of the issues that I'd been thinking about, trying to understand for years. Just as one quick example, the monologue Bearing the Cemetery. When I heard that, I said, well, there's genocide. That's what genocide is on the ground, literally, on the earth. And that's his opening line, which is, how do you destroy an entire people? That is what genocide is. But he shows, not just tells, but shows. Had I not been doing that background, maybe I wouldn't have seen it or recognized this really conveys something.
Yeah. How much of the monologues were the words of the survivors versus your,
Right.
I don't know, just trying to remember.
Reconstruction,
Put it
dramatic.
into some structure.
Yeah. It's a great question because it's, here's what I want to say. That, for example, the woman whose story is his voice, who lost her voice. She was asked by a reporter after this was first done on stage. She was there in the audience. She was asked, is that exactly what you said to Hank in the interviews? And she said, well, it's not exactly what I said, but it's exactly what I meant. So, as a psychologist or a playwright, of course, that's you want to hear. I can't give a percentage, but it was definitely a collaborative back and forth. One fascinating and thing, I almost felt bad about it first, but then I said, this is how life is. One of the survivors, the woman who's very close to me, whose story is vanity, after she's seen this piece many times, and I noticed that I'd often go to schools when she spoke, and at times she borrowed back from the play when she spoke in schools. So she used some of the intonations and some of the ways of speaking that she heard me reconstruct in the piece when she spoke in schools. I think all of our stories and accounts, we think of them as being ours, and they are, but they emerge between people, and the ways we tell, we see how people respond. They may suggest a metaphor. It's kind of what that, we'll say, yeah, that's cool. And then maybe the next time we'll tell the same thing. We'll borrow it. We won't give them a footnote, but we will make use of some of what they suggested. So I think many of our stories, if not almost all, emerge between people. And before survivors spoke with me, even if they had spoken to a lot of people outside each other, they'd spoken with each other for years and years and years, as you will know.
Mhm.
So these recountings were already honed in a variety of ways. So I think of myself as being one additional person to do that. But it's a combination. Some of the lines are absolutely verbatim. Some of the shaping is, I would say, my contribution. All the survivors represented have seen it. In many cases, I mentioned more than once. And for them, they've always been pleased. So, that's my main criteria. And both those represented, and if there are survivors in the audience more generally, there often are, they're the first criterion. If it's okay with them, I feel okay, if it captures something.
Yep.
That's important.
And you must sort of try to embody them, like become them for that little moment as much as you can.
Yeah. I mean, that's what
Yeah, but at the same time, I'm thinking about the person whose cousin said, "Don't talk." I know about this because I saw it in the news.
Mhm.
You're kind of the guy who saw it in the news because you weren't there, but then you're trying to represent it as if you were there. So
Yeah.
it's a little mind twisting.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. And I still am sorting this out. I will say, after all these years, I say sometimes I don't really want to play survivors in the usual sense, like a character on stage. I see myself as a mediator between what I heard from them and the shaping I described, and then using the medium of my voice, my body, etc., in order to relay it on. On the other hand, you watch this and you say, the guy's playing survivors. Once it's pretty obvious. When you know people well, it's very different than, say, reading a part from Shakespeare or something. You don't know that person. You have to create the character. I know these people. And even if I do some tweaks here and some shaping there, still the sense of who they are is very much in my head, in my heart, and in some ways in my body. I did my own transcribing in many of the, especially the first set of interviews. And when you transcribe, as we all know, you hear, you go back and you go back and you go back to get it right. So these voices become almost inscribed, not only what people said, but how they said it, what
So
the
it was an
rhythms.
interview that you taped and you could listen to it over and over again. It wasn't just you
Absolutely.
listened to them and took a few notes.
No,
You
no, 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 no. I
had it
transcribed.
on tape.
Yeah, I went from the tape to a written transcript, and you'll know, to make a transcript takes
I know.
10 hours for 1 hour. And I try to get most of the ers and ahs, and doing that again kind of brought these voices into my head. And so when I say this, even if I'm not using absolute verbatim, I feel the rhythms, I feel the voices as part of me in a way that's different than if you're doing a character from a play that someone else wrote, and they're basically an imagined person, or if they're historical figure, still, I don't know them. So that's quite a different thing, I think.
So one of the questions in the chat here, how did you choose which stories to tell if you
Yeah.
cannot tell them all?
Yeah. These, what I call special moments, are not that common. So it's not like I had a wide array. There is a trajectory in the piece that isn't, I don't hit people over the head with it, but there is a logic that's deliberate. You start with a woman who lost her voice. Then you have a guy who says, I wanted to talk about it, right? So silence becomes one of those things that we often rest in when we talk about the Holocaust. I can't say anything. It's beyond words. And some of it is, obviously. But here's a man who says us, after silence, I wanted to talk about it. If I could, I did. So he stops and he leaves us on another planet, Mars. Next person, I won't go through the whole, buried in the cemetery, says, effectively says, no, 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 wasn't another planet. It was this planet. It was Earth, not only on the Earth, but in the Earth. And he tells us how that was in the Earth. He ends with ash, right? Spread around in the soil. Next woman, and I'll stop after this, says,
remembers our father who used to play a lot of soccer, her mother, red-haired brother. This is not Ash. These are human beings. So each one, in that sense, builds from and in a certain sense against the prior one. And that's deliberate too, because, you know, we now have so much on this topic relative to what we once did that I think it's often true that people feel, oh, I know that, been there, seen that, done that, you know. And in a way, this piece is saying, maybe not. Maybe what you've been saying about silence, you know, maybe what you've been saying about this, I don't want to make it too easy. And there is a sense in which this piece can be unremitting because I'm pushing against that assumption of last words. There are no last words about this topic. There are none. They're
No.
just first words. Yeah. Beginning of conversation.
Right. Yeah, every single one of these can lead to an entire hour of conversation in a classroom to process it through.
Right.
You know, the one about the comedy, Norman Cousins, you know, if we can just laugh, everybody will be fine.
Sure.
You know, I have a little story. My mother was also in Theresienstadt. And in the cattle car from Westerbork to Theresienstadt, she sat with a famous comedian, and he told jokes and stories and sang songs and tried to help the people in that cattle car have some semblance of hope, not be too anxious, try to keep, it was a form of resistance.
Yes.
Theater was a form of resistance.
Yeah.
During the Holocaust by the actors.
Yeah.
So this is all me leading to, is this your resistance to something?
I guess it is. You know, I'm working on a play, which is to me maybe the most important thing, if I can ever get it done. But the main character is a man named Rubinstein. We don't even know his first name, but he was very well known in Warsaw Ghetto. He was called the mad jester of the Warsaw Ghetto, and he was a street artist. He was this guy who told stories and antics and did all kinds of crazy stuff. And in one way, you could say it was a kind of resistance. He was very critical of, you know, as you will know, the ghetto. There was a lot of politics. There was a lot of inequality. He went after the elite. He was a sort of voice of the people. So there's not only resistance against the destruction from the outside, but even within the ghetto itself and some of the inequality. So what do I hesitate? What I think, for him at least, what his antics and so on were about was to keep imagination alive. Imagination, which when you're in such extremity, and we know this, you know, as psychologists, in truly traumatic situations, there's no happy place that you can go to. I mean, you know, when we're in a dentist's office, you know, we can say, oh, yeah, I'm on the lake, I'm in the mountains. When you're in real traumatic situations, part of what makes them that is that you cannot escape. And I think, so imagination just in itself is, whether it's resistance or whether it's just keeping something alive, like the capacity to dream, which many survivors describe having just the beginnings of dreams, and then even while asleep, those dreams would sort of dissolve. Because as famous survivor Charlotte Delbo once said, reality was right there killing. Even in a dream, you couldn't always get away, even in imagination. So resistance in that sense. But even this character, in the play anyway, ends up eventually on a train to Treblinka. For folks who don't know, Treblinka was almost as murderous a place, maybe actually even more, not by numbers, but by how many survived in Auschwitz. And part of that scene is he's no longer able to go anywhere in imagination. Imagination, for mostly, is crushed. So, yeah, so it's, to me, complicated, I guess, in that way. And I'm not sure why. It is a form of, it's a form of, I'll call it persistence.
rather than resistance. I'm not sure why I want to call it that, but I mean, to keep doing what we are and who we are obviously matters, and tiny ways, not only artistic ways. But I just told a story, a woman whose story is vanity. When she was sorting clothes in Birkenau, she came across her own jacket, and in the jacket was a photo of a favorite cousin. You know, she took it out, she put it in her shoe, and she kept it in her shoe throughout the war. It was, in a few weeks, it was nothing but white powder, but it was a photo of her cousin. Is that resistance? Is it belonging? Is it connection? It's all of those things, I think. But that was,
I think that whole putting the mirror, making the little vanity, that's resistance too. That's trying to make
absolutely,
something humanizing, and it's the
absolutely.
most dehumanizing place on
Exactly.
earth.
Yeah. And I, of course, deliberately end with this question, to which I, everyone will go with it how they do. Does it inspire your hope or your revulsion that someone would do that in the middle of? I mean, and I think it's both. I will tell you, Aggie, whose story this is, the woman I just mentioned, she emphasized that side. And me being me, I wanted to make it, because she also told it in that sort of on the one hand, on the other hand way. And so I thought, especially for the end of this piece, which is, again, I don't want there to be a last word. I don't want there to be an obvious resolution. I want to leave people with questions, things to think about, things to discuss. So I want to leave that scale absolutely unresolved. Absolutely. So
Yeah.
that's what leads to good discussion.
Okay, we are running out of time.
Okay.
I would like to read you the last comment here from one of our attendees, which says, "Thank you for sharing your gift. As a young artist and performer, and someone who is learning and listening to the stories of this history, I am so inspired by your work." So
Nothing better than that.
nothing better than that.
Nothing better than that. That's the point. I mean,
So
thank
thank you
you,
so much, Hank.
person. Thank you.
And I would like to thank everybody who has been joining us for this presentation and all the presentations we've had this week. It's been a packed week. Thank you for joining us for Vermont's first Holocaust Education Week. I know I found this incredibly meaningful, impactful. I hope everybody else did too. Is that if anybody's got questions that they come up with after the presentation today, feel free to reach out to us. We'll try to get questions answered even in the future. We can email Mr. Greenspan, get the information. Also,
I'm always open. Email me, whatever.
okay.
Again, that's why I do this, for the schmooze, for the discussion. So.
Right. We also, teachers, students, we want feedback about the week. If you have anything you can tell us about how we can be, Vermont Holocaust Memorial can be helpful to you in the future for teaching these lessons, let us know. We can be reached at info@holocaustmemorial-vt.org. And I just wish everybody a good day, a good weekend, and I hope you got a lot out of this. Thank you.
Peace. Peace to everybody.